Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Henry Madoff, the chair of the master's program in curatorial practice at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And each week I have a distinguished curator who joins to talk about their history, their practice. And today I have Dr. Astrid Peterle, and I'm going to read a short bio for Astrid, and then she'll speak for about 50 minutes. At that point, it's the time that you can put a question for Astrid in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. I'll read those questions aloud, um, and that's the way it works. So with that, welcome, Astrid. And I'll just read this brief bio that reads, before her current position as chief curator at the Museumsquartier Vienna, Astrid served as the head of the curatorial department at the Kunsthalle Wien. There, she curated the exhibitions of the Kunsthalle Wien Prize in 22 and 2023, which is awarded annually to graduating students of the Academy of Fine Arts and the University of Applied Arts, Vienna. From 2010 to 2022, she worked at the Jewish Museum Vienna, becoming chief curator in 2018. While there, she oversaw the concept for the permanent exhibition, Our Middle Ages, the first Jewish community in Vienna at Museum Judenplatz, 2018-2021. From 2017 to 2022, she also served as the curator for performance at the Donaufestival Krems. Astrid has published widely on contemporary art and Viennese cultural history, with a particular focus on performance art, choreography, film, photography, and feminist art practice. So with that, welcome, Astrid. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen, for this wonderful introduction. And first of all, I really want to thank for this invitation. I'm deeply honored to be part and grateful. And yeah, I will share my presentation with you. So as you probably already heard by the introduction of Stephen, I'm going to focus today on my rather unusual curatorial biography. Especially in the last couple of years, I really understood that this is, not that common to not have this kind of straight biography in the contemporary art field, especially. And so I really do hope that by presenting my biography, I might also encourage some people to, sometimes different, how do you say, navigating through different fields can really enrich your curatorial practice. I was also asked to give a brief intro in how I became a curator. At all. And you see in the left corner a rather embarrassing photo of myself as a child, because that was, I think, one of the roots of curating, because I was trained as a professional dancer. I grew up in the south of Austria, and from 3 to 18 had this very intense professional training. And really, I think there my passion for the performative arts was sparked. And on the other hand, I had a mother who not came from the art field, but she really took me from kindergarten on to guided tours in museums and to the theater. And I was apparently always the first one in line at every guided tour, following the guide. So I think, that was the start of it all. When I was 18, I decided to go to Vienna to study history and art history. So already there, my two fields of interest were kind of started. I didn't want to become a professional dancer, but through the Tanzquartier Wien, which was founded in 2001, I sparked my love in performance art and contemporary choreography. And after finishing my studies, I was able to get a PhD scholarship by the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And this is the second picture that you see here, which shows a Karen Finley. It's a photo of a performance by Karen Finley. And Karen Finley, the distinguished a New York-based artist and professor at Tisch School at NYU. She also brought me to New York for half a year in 2007 for my PhD thesis, which was from a feminist perspective, focusing on the notion of subversion in art and the political potentials of body representations. And yeah, it was a very formative time for me, this PhD. And it already there, I also dealt with very diverse art forms. So photography from the surrealist time with Claude Cahun and Marcel Moore, to performance art and the whole political situation around the so-called NEA for artists, to a contemporary choreographer, Mette Ingwertsen. While being a cultural historian and trained as such, I delved more and more into the Viennese art scene. And the first curatorial projects that I did was in the independent art scene with befriended artists. So Vienna, for all of you who don't know, has a very lively and vivid independent art space. Right now we have more than 100 so-called off spaces, independent art spaces. And also during that time, I started working at the Curatorial Collective at the Curatorial Wien, which also sparked my interest in working in teams, in co-curating with colleagues. That's something that I would say as some of the most important curatorial projects of my life, I really did curate together with colleagues. So that's also when this started. And the two photos that you see on the right, on the very right corner, this is my first institutional curatorial exhibition as an assistant curator at the Jewish Museum. I did an exhibition on Andy Warhol's 10 portraits of Jews of the 20th century. And on the top, sometimes as a curator, you also have to jump in to be a performer. Something I was always reluctant to say. I think especially in the 10th and 2000 series years, it was very popular for curators and theorists to suddenly also become performers. But there I really had to jump in a general rehearsal at the Donaufestival. You see me knitting with electronically amplified metal needles in a performance of Arid Eschery called Passing Through Metal. Yeah, and here you have an overview. As I said, my biography is a bit unusual. Coming from independent curatorial spaces, I started my first institutional curatorial job in 2010 at the Jewish Museum Vienna, which is a city-funded institution with a collection. There I was primarily working in cultural historical exhibitions, from starting as an assistant curator and in the end becoming the chief curator. During that, I always kept active in smaller settings. My privileged situation as an employee of an institution gave me this possibility to take on also more smaller projects on the side as author, dramaturge, as a curator. And in 2017, I also became the performance curator of an annual contemporary art festival called Donaufestival Krems. It's just 1 hour outside of Vienna. It's happening on 2 weekends a year. And there I was able to both commission performative art projects as well as invite international projects. And after 12 years at the museum, I decided that I kind of like want to go away from this like split identity of mine between being a historian and art curator. The cultural historians always considered me to be the art curator. The art curator is the cultural historian. So I always found I didn't want to miss neither nor. But it's sometimes not so easy for people to wrap their head around it. But I decided to take on the possibility, on a new job as the head of the curatorial department at Kunsthalle Wien, which is the city of Vienna's production house for contemporary art. Had a great opportunity to work first with the curators collective What, How, and For Whom as my directors, and then Michelle Cotton, and worked with many, many great international artists from Laure Prouvost to Ibrahim Mahama. But as I will then also show you, mainly my project was also working with art students from the two art academies in Vienna. And as of October last year, I'm the chief curator of Museumsquartier, which is one of it's Europe's biggest cultural district, and it's state and city funded. And yeah, we are housing 9 of the biggest art institutions in Vienna, including Kunsthalle Wien. We have 5 million visitors a year visiting the district, and there I'm mainly focusing on public art. And yeah, I will come to that later. But let me first start with my first institutional job, which was being at the Jewish Museum. This is just a mood board to give you an impression. Obviously, I was dealing there a lot with cultural historical topics and exhibitions, but from the very start, I always tried to integrate contemporary art commissions also into cultural historical exhibitions. And I want to showcase 2 exhibitions that I did there that were especially formative for my understanding as a curator. The first exhibition is a project that I did together with 2 other curators, Natalia Petrova and Simon Mraz. And it was a cooperation with the Austrian Cultural Forum in Moscow and the Memorial. The Memorial is a human rights organization which actually won in 2022 the Nobel Peace Prize for documenting political repression and human rights violations. And in 2014, we had the idea to work with the collections of both the Jewish Museum in Vienna and the Memorial, who has an amazing collection of Gulag victims and artifacts collected from gulags. And we decided to send 3 Austrian artists to Moscow and 3 Russian artists to Vienna to work with the collection of the other cities' institution and collection. And there they chose historical objects, and out of these objects created art installations. And for me, this was a very, very formative experience, because I really understood back then, and that's something that I do until now, that I really love how artists look at historical objects, how they work with collections, how they work with historical topics, and how they also, as me as a historian, as a curator from a collection, really inspire me to think differently, ask different questions, ask also sometimes uncomfortable questions about the objects. Where do they come from? What stories do they tell? What do we know about it? And I think this is really something which from then on I cherished a lot, tried to include a lot in the exhibitions, the perspective of artists working with historical objects and creating new perspectives on these historical topics. And I also have a very I have to say that as of today, as the Memorial is now a forbidden organization in Russia, we also don't know, the collection in this way is not accessible anymore. So also this, looking back on how we were able to work with this amazing collection, and also through the publication also we're able to keep some of these objects in our, with us, so to say, in our visibility. Really have very fond memories of this experience. This is another view. So some of the artists worked more closely with the historical objects, as you can see on the left, by Zenita Kumat, and then also the one on the right, you see this painting on the wall is by Alisa Joffe, and she was inspired by a Torah curtain, so something that where you can really link the historical object to what you see now. And the second project from this period of my life I want to talk about is the project of the permanent exhibition at Museum Judenplatz. I think for curators working at institutions with collections, working on a permanent exhibition really is one of the most beautiful projects that one can be can take on and can get the trust to do. And I was working on this for 3 years. I was the leading project leader, but I worked together with a team and an amazing team of experts. And I have to say, this is also something that from my experience of being a chief curator, something that was always very important for me, working with experts in different topics. We worked here with experts of medieval history, of Judaica, Jewish ritual objects, archaeology, architectural history. So being very interested in very diverse topics, I obviously always knew I can't be an expert on everything, even if thorough research is something very important and dear to me. So I really do think it takes a village also to build and set up a permanent exhibition, especially there, it's very obvious. Museum Judenplatz is the second location of the Jewish Museum, and you can see the entrance here on the back, on the right side, behind Rachel Whiteread's a famous and very very important Shoah monument. That was actually the reason why Museum Judenplatz is existing nowadays, and that's something that we wanted to show this story, because as Museum Judenplatz, when they decided finally in the 1990s to finally decided to build a Shoah monument, a monument to our Shoah victims, Rachel Whiteread was chosen in a competition, and when they started with preparatory works, and they discovered the excavation of the medieval synagogue that was destroyed in 1421 in a pogrom, and something that they didn't, the archaeology always kind of hoped to find, but they weren't sure it really is there. And when they discovered the remains, it was a huge cultural political discussion for years and years, whether to actually build at the monument, whether you can build a monument on top of the excavation of a synagogue. That was a big religious discussion. There were many cultural, political, civil society debates going on, and it really took more than 5 years, and then finally the monument was built, and the museum, through the museum that was set up, it was possible to also access the synagogue. So in 2010, we decided to do a new a permanent exhibition. And what you can see here is the entrance wall, and that's something where I can show you, I can tell you a bit about the approach that we did, because we decided that we really want to make the curatorial process of setting up this exhibition visible and really take the audience on a journey through reflecting the process of historiography, research, and museology. So how is history written on a site like this that is important for so many diverse groups of people, for so many different reasons, which has such a long history, from being the site of the first Jewish community in Vienna to the site of the Shoah monument today. And we decided to integrate, it was a quite didactic approach, because we have had a very broad audience there, with the majority of people coming from international visitors, but then also a Viennese audience, many school classes who have never heard about the history of this site and of the first Jewish community. So what we did here is we concentrated on one key object, as we say in museology, which was actually a key. You see it here on the right side. It's a key that was found during the excavation of the site, and we don't know what it locked or unlocked. It might have been the key of the synagogue, but who knows? So also already there you can say a lot about historical objects and what they actually speak what they speak out of themselves, so to say, and what we can just assume and will never be able to know. So also there we also wanted to show an exhibition doesn't necessarily have to give answers, but it actually should encourage to ask questions. And we set up a lot of mirrors, and we also set up something which is called lenticular foils. I hope you also call it like this in English. I'm not sure. That's at least what we say in German. You all know these maybe from postcards. These are foils where you position yourself from one viewing point, and you look at it and you see one image, and then you flip it and you see, or you look from a different angle and you see something else. And this we used for asking questions and assumptions and stereotypes about the medieval times, about about different questions that were important for us during setting up this exhibition. And so you, from one side, you could see the question, and from the other side, you got one answer, one possible answer. So already there we wanted to show you always have to take a position, you have to take a standpoint while addressing the past, and you always look at it from the present. So your position might also change. This is just a glimpse into the excavation site of the medieval synagogue. After years and years of discussion, it was decided that the Shoah monument will be built on top of this excavation. In 2000, it was then opened and brought to the public. And what we did here was we wanted to give visitors an idea of the different archaeological research that was done and how the synagogue might have looked like through the assumption of architectural history and archaeology. I also want to say that I am normally very reluctant to use a lot of digital media in exhibitions. I mean, this would be a completely other talk. I think this is one of the great pros that we have in exhibitions, and as curators to also, I mean, if we are not dealing with digital art, that's something different. But if we are dealing with non-technological and non-digital exhibition and artifacts and art, to also provide the space for people to de-accelerate, to not have this constant digital overflow of images and of information. But there, I think it really made sense to use this technology. It was a screen which you could move, and you could see the 3 different stages of architectural history, of architectural development of the synagogue, and you could also kind of like fly above through the floor and look onto the Rachel White monument from above. I also here invited a contemporary artist for a commission. This is the entrance to the permanent exhibition. I invited Anna Ataka, a Vienna-based artist who is doing really great projects with a lot of historical research, very in-depth research. And I invited her to do a project on the autographs of medieval Jewish community members in Vienna. And this is a very interesting historical fact, that why the majority society, most of the people were illiterate at that time. Many members of the Jewish community were able to read and write. And thus we have documents, surviving documents with autographs by both men and women of the Jewish community in Vienna. And Anna did this projection, which is actually a light projection, and it's moving, so it's not like you see it now, but it's the autographs are appearing and disappearing, and thus also giving us this idea that so many people from the past are only we have very, no trace of them at all, or just very fleeting traces of them. So most of the people here, we don't know anything else about their lives but the autographs that survived. So this, I think, is a very poetic entrance to the exhibition. So just summing up my time at the Jewish Museum, I have to say that it was formative for me in the way of making the process of curating of methods, of perspective and approaches transparent and visible to audiences. That's something that I really find very important. My own approach as a curator. I also always whether I'm working with cultural historical topics or with artists, always considered myself more as an enabler and facilitator rather than an author. And if I'm an author, because you always are an author also, I really want to reflect and make a transparent and comprehensible to audiences also from which standpoint and with which methods I'm working. It was also formative for me as working closely together with colleagues across the institution, involving educational teams from the beginning. So not something that comes after my curatorial concept is finished, but really involve them from the very beginning, as they will be the ones who will most of the time communicate what I conceptualized to an audience. And it also showed me that also for cultural historical topics, you can invite artists to develop projects based on this, and you will get results of completely different perspectives, which then can be very fruitful for both me as a curator, but also for the audiences, because they will maybe artists will also ask similar questions than an audience not coming from an expert perspective of the museum asks, but also really show them a different story, a different perspective than the curatorial one. I only very briefly speak about my time at the Donaufestival. as a performance curator, as I want to focus here on my institutional curating. But these are the photos of two of my, yeah, you should never say you have favorite projects, because they all are favorite projects and they are all my babies. But this was also very, yeah, I have very vivid memories of these two projects. The one, you see the two photos of a performance by the Austrian choreographer Karin Power together with the visual artist Aldo Giannotti. It's called This Is Where We Draw the Line from 2019. And this was a project which also involved the audience. They were dancing and drawing lines and with these black strings. They were drawing, so to say, in space, and also activated the audience and encouraged them to do so during the choreography and be part of a choreography, something that I know not everybody is fond of being activated as an audience. But I have to say, even some of my friends who are not so happy about that, they were, yeah, they have fond memories of this. I think it's a lot about how you address the audience, and also not anybody who doesn't want to participate doesn't have to participate. I think it needs a lot of sensitivity, both by the artist as well as the curator, how to activate the audience. And the second is a project by Brit Hatzius called Blind Cinema. And this I'm very fond of, because Brit developed this together with school classes from Krems, doing workshops with them, and the performance itself then was adult audience being led blindfolded into a cinema space, and children sitting behind them with these little yeah, I don't know how to call it, like instruments that they were whispering into the ears of the adults what the children actually saw on the screen. And it was a film that the children saw for the first time in that moment. It was a part of a Jacques Tati film, which, for example, involved an analog film projector, something that the children obviously had struggles to describe. So again, this was very interesting experience, I think, both for children and the audience. And you also saw in the beginning the photo of myself knitting in the performance. This is a performance that we did together with 40 knitters, a knitters club from Krems. So I always also I really liked projects where I involved local communities. Yeah, I want to transition into Kunsthalle Wien and to two projects that were already introduced to you by Stephen. It's the so-called Kunsthalle Wien Prize. It's an award that is given by a jury each year, a jury both combined by Kunsthalle Wien and the two art academies. Graduate students from all different art classes, so not just I mean from visual arts, but there are also stage design and filmmakers, yeah, sculptors, painters, video artists, trans art. And the exhibition under the artistic directorship of Watthain Verhum was a bit changed. We changed the modus of the exhibition, because there weren't just there were two main winners, one by each art academy, but there were in total 10 artists chosen each year. And we set up this group exhibition. And this is the first one that I did together with my colleague, Peterle Vermutel, senior curator from Steirischer Herbst. And we called it Unfreezing the Scene. And I'm not going to get into the very interesting art projects that the artists did, but or the scenography, which we also did with one of the artists, and that was based on the actual history of the site of Kunsthalle on Karlsplatz. But I want to say that this was a very formative project for me because it gave me the opportunity to work with 20 young artists who most of them, or the majority of them, have never exhibited in an institutional setting before. So I saw my responsibility mainly in navigating the artists through institutional specificities and limitations. I think they are existing everywhere in all institutions. Vienna has a especially strict a health and safety a regulation framework, and thus it can be quite frustrating and quite maybe even like a shock sometimes for young artists coming into this into the settings that how do you explain to a young artist who is working with cardboard, also for reasons of sustainability and recycling, that you have to impregnate all of these cardboards because of fire hazard regulations. So you're changing the artwork and the intention of the artworks by having to having to work inside a certain institutional framework. So there I really have to say I started to love this communication with artists, young artists, because I think it's a very it's an essential moment for them transitioning from the art academies and from independent art spaces to institutions. And it really is, it takes a lot of communication, a lot of dialogue to really balance between enabling, wanting to enable, and what you can enable in a certain institutional framework. And we also invited the artists to use the whole institution as an amplifier for what they want to communicate, what they want to show, and really use all the different departments of the institutions. So not just as curators, but press, education, marketing, to really set up different formats of presenting their work. In the second edition of the award that I curated on my own, I called "Come as You Are." I have to confess that I always wanted to use this title, one of my favorite songs by Nirvana, but I really saw it very fitting for this exhibition format, because this title is on the one hand it's an invitation, but it's also an instruction, and it's an opportunity, but it also is a restriction, a promise and a challenge. And it's by all the things that I already said about working with young artists, it also meant this format was a very unusual way of doing a group show, because the group show was not based on a curatorial concept of mine, but it was put together by the decision of a jury, that the jury did choose 10 artists, not by, wanting to put them together in exhibition, but by wanting to award them. And thus I had to work with the 10, each one of them, asking them, what do you want to show, what do you want to present, and how do you want to present? And then kind of like putting together a dramaturgy and a dialogue between these 10. And this was a beautiful challenge that I also have very fond memories of. So summing up my time, just some more impressions, and you see this is a very specific site. Kunsthalle has 2 locations, just as the Jewish Museum does, and this is a glass box situation. where we also use the LED screen outside of the space as a screen for projecting text-based art by the artists. So summing up Kunsthalle, that was a time where I really learned how to navigate artists through the structures of institutions, and really learned the constant challenge of balancing between wanting to enable and being able to enable in an institutional framework. And it was also a time of cooperating very closely internationally to enable new commissions and specific exhibition formats. And I think as we are all facing a lot of financial and budget challenges, I think worldwide, and we're living in a time of repression and contexts that get more and more difficult. I think this is something that we will all have to focus on more. We are stronger together, and we can enable projects for artists by cooperating. And this is something that will be needed more and more. Whilst on the other hand, also thinking about transport, climate aspects. So I think there are a lot of challenges, but I think it is very important to think about how to work together in a bigger framework of institutions. Yeah, and then as of autumn of last year, I was asked to become the chief curator of the Museumsquartier. And the Museumsquartier, for anybody who has never been to Vienna or seen it, is in the very heart and the center of Vienna, and it's a huge district. As I said, we have nine big institutions and 60 smaller cultural institutions. We still have 23 families living and people living in the district. So we have apartments, we have a kindergarten, we have restaurants, but we also have the biggest courtyard in Vienna. And the courtyard is something that is we use very much for programming public art. So that's something that I think about a lot now and for my future program, as of how to present art in the public space. The 5 million people that are passing through the district each year, not all of them come there to visit one of the museums or one of the theatre or the Tanzquartier. But some of what I think connects most of these people is that they are spending their spare time, leisure time there. And so how to also get people interested or maybe also by surprise catch them with an artistic intervention. And we have a summer stage. So we do have stage. We have the possibility of temporarily programming. We have sculptures and more permanent displays. We do have also a very long-standing program of artist in residence. I forgot to mention, as a historian, I'm also very excited about the fact that we celebrate our 25 years anniversary this year. I was actually there as a student on the weekend it was opened, so it's kind of like a full circle that I am there now. And since then we have this artist in residence program, which makes it possible for us each year. More than 60 international artists can live and work at the Museumsquartier. We have 8 studios in the district, and every 2 months we change. So it's a beautiful opportunity also for me and my colleagues to get to know these artists from all around the world. Although we have one special focus also on artist solidarity and artists from repressive political contexts. And thus we are also in our public art program, programming exhibition formats where we are dealing with topics that these artists bring to us and are concerned with in their everyday life. We next week are opening, for example, an exhibition by a Ukrainian artist duo. In the beginning of the year, we had an exhibition called Women Against War by oppositional Russian artists, a feminist art collective dealing with the Flinter victims of the war and political repression. So there is a focus also on this in our programming. But as a curator, I'm also there responsible for the MQ Freiraum, which is a classical white cube art exhibition space. And this is the very first exhibition that I was able to curate now, together with an artist, Andreas Fogarashi, a concept that was set up by my predecessor, Verena Kasper-Eisert, but I chose the artworks and executed the exhibition then with Andreas. And I also come back to this fact of co-curating. This was the very first time for me working with an artist as a co-curator, and this was a very a wonderful experience. The exhibition is focusing a lot on the artistic practice of Andreas, who for many, many years is dealing with the circle of architecture in urban contexts. We thus also have the subtitle, We Build Houses, We Take Them Apart, and all 12 artists shown there are very much focusing on materials that are used in architecture and building houses, but also the circle of tearing down, of uselessness, of using, of developing, that is inscribed into the circle of architecture. And I said it was very special to work with an artist as a curator, because also there, for the first time I experienced that sometimes in the dialogue as a curator and artist together with another artist, especially if you haven't worked with the artist before, that you ask to, you invite to your exhibition. It's interesting that the artist, maybe in this kind of communication of trust building that you have to do whilst working, setting up a first-time collaboration, artists, Andreas as an artist could ask and propose maybe different things than I as a curator would maybe dare to ask, or even maybe get such a immediate response then between two artists. So for this was a very was for me also a very formative experience, since the trust building and the setting up a very close dialogue with the artist is something that is very important for me in my practice. Here you can see just a view of the exhibition and something which we call the material library. This is based on an artwork by Andreas, where we asked all the participating artists to bring us small material samples from their studios. That kind of this library kind of functions as a quotation mark collection. No, quotation mark is the wrong. Quotes like footnotes and quotes to the artworks in the exhibition. And something that I also opened recently was Art Box installation by Vienna-based artist Eva Seiler. The Art Box is one of the most popular places for art in the Museumsquartier. It's this kind of, I call it like a fish tank aquarium situation, a glass box. we're in the main courtyard that is dedicated to showing Vienna-based artists and different art forms and formats. It's a very challenging space. I think I was very happy to work with Eva about this. I can't get into into the installation. Just saying, it was done in the cooperation with the Klima Biennale Wien, a festival, biennial festival for art and ecology, and it's dealing a lot with the silkworms and the industrialization and domestication of silkworms and the relation to human bodies working with silk production as something that was in the past primarily done by women. And thus the word spinster, referring to women that many of the women who worked in the textile industry now I don't know the English word, not how do you say not maybe sometimes not when they are called spinster, it's not something that they have necessarily chosen as a life form, but they are called like this. Many of them were unmarried, without women without families, and sisterhood as a term of empowerment. So the transformation of the silkworm, and that kind of also has a potential for transforming. So bringing together the positive word of sisterhood and the spinster from a feminist perspective. It's too short of time to get into this complex project. Just to show you a glimpse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus a lot on public art in the near future, and I'm going to be able to commission in different art forms and formats, something that makes me very happy, since a lot of my time also in the last years was dedicated into setting up the structures and the frameworks for curating, and now I can go more closely back into working with artists and the different art forms that I was always interested in. And the next thing that is waiting for me to work on is a project on Saturday by the Bosnian artist Sheila Kamaric, who is well known for her politically engaged artwork, and it's called Awake. It's a one-day, a temporary light installation that we're going to show on Saturday evening in the courtyard, and I'm very much looking forward to this and all the challenges that await me in the next years. And I want to just sum up what curating means to me. It's taking care, enabling, coordinating, facilitating, and translating. And when I say this, I mean this not just only in the relationship with artists, but also in the relation with the whole institution and all my colleagues and the team, and also with the audience. So I think it's communication, it's a dialogue between all these different participants, but most of all on the very core of how I started and why I started is enthusiastically amplifying artistic practices. So this is what I see as my main the main inspiration that keeps me going. Curating is a dialogue, is a negotiating, it's compromises, it's open narratives. It's, I think, very, very important to having an honest dialogue about expectations with artists, about the limitations. It's a constant balancing and often struggling of enabling versus constraining. I here speak from the privileged position of an institution, but it's still, always something that where you need to navigate through the specificities of each institution. And yeah, as I said earlier, I think the context that we all work in is not getting easier. It's making research and strategies and processes also visible to audiences. I think also there to be transparent, to take them with us on our journeys, how we do things, how we don't do things, and also maybe really confronting the gaps, and also being honest about with what we don't achieve and can't achieve maybe. And I want to end with something when I look back, and it was really a deep dive into my curatorial biography. Thank you, Stephen, also for that opportunity. I think we sometimes need to reflect maybe more on why we do things, and how we have done them in the past and how we do them today. I really want to say supporting young colleagues is something that is very important to me. I had the great luck of having absolutely astonishing, great women bosses through my whole career, and they supported me immensely. I learned a lot from them, and that's something I want to give back to younger colleagues. And I want to encourage them. I hope speaking with them about my unusual path is helpful, and don't not to be afraid of these challenging navigating between different art institutions and different forms of curating. So yeah, thank you very much. that's
Great.
that's
Thank
the
you.
end.
Wonderful. Thanks. There are a lot of questions, so I'm going to jump right into them, um, and try to organize them a little bit since there are so many. So there are a few about being a curator and becoming one. Frida says, I'd be interested in your advice for young curators. I myself am a photography student, but I'm more interested in specializing in curating, and I'm wondering if you would recommend going into an academic curating path. Is that something you would have liked to get into yourself, studying curating?
That's a very good question. As you have seen, I haven't really been part of a curatorial studies program. So, and I'm not speaking in this context, not going to say you should not study in a curatorial studies program. It's just, I already studied history and art history, and I have to say, through my PhD, I learned a lot of the discursive framework. So I would encourage you to, first of all, really try to go into practice, because I think curating is something that you also learn by doing. Start maybe get connection with small spaces, start working with artists. That's how I did, because I think that it's studying the academic part of it is very important to get an understanding of methods, of discourses, to learn how to research. But I think it's also, curating also means a lot of project management. It also means a lot of communicating with the artists. And this, I think, I haven't been student at the School of Visual Arts with Stephen, but I can only say that here in Vienna, I know that's something that you really do have to learn out of the academic context. So yes, if you want to go deeper into discourses and research, I can encourage to do this, but really also try to do as many projects as possible.
And that relates directly to the very first question, which was, can an artist be considered a curator in your opinion? What makes one a curator? Is it not the experience, wearing many hats, history, passion, knowledge of the artist, or is it more? Do you need to possess a certificate? So I think you've answered that, but do you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, I can say that because as I just had the very close experience of working with an artist who has also a experience of curating. I would say absolutely, as an artist, you can also be a curator, but I think you don't necessarily need to be a curator as an artist. But if you are interested in it, I do think it's a lot. It means a lot about experience, like really dealing with other artists, working with other artists, and doing research, doing yeah, work in discourse. But then, absolutely, you can also be as an artist curator. I find it actually very inspiring.
Okay. Jung asks, has your experience as a dancer given you different ways of observing or sensing space when you're curating?
Um, I would hope so. Yes. It's certainly something that I profit a lot. This because choreography and dance for me is moving bodies in space, and I think also an exhibition has a dramaturgy as it has a certain choreography. At least we as curators have a certain intention in mind, how we want audiences to move in space. But the beauty is that also the audience is emancipated and they can move however they want. So, but I do think it absolutely, yeah, it's great to sometimes get back to this idea of moving bodies and also incorporate that in conceptualizing an exhibition.
All right. Next, Lucky. Hi, this is Lucky from the Performing Arts Co-op in Taiwan. I'm curious whether Astrid perceives embodied experiences as a strategic framework for deepening museum public engagement. Additionally, what are the community landscapes targeted by the Museumsquartier public initiatives, and what is the institution's vision for its community support infrastructure? So really three questions.
That's yeah, that's a big question and something that I want to actually I start thinking a lot about. I started when I started this job. I'm thinking a lot about. I do want to reach out to more communities in Vienna and partnerships with initiatives here in Vienna, working in different districts of the city because I do think there are a lot of people coming to us, but then there are maybe also people who are not coming to us, and I want them to feel welcome. And it's also something that in the Museumsquartier, in the institutions, we have a lot of great education departments. I myself, the Museumsquartier itself, for our program, we are starting to set up also a framework of education, more education workshops. And for example, in the end of May, we have a whole day dedicated to children and young people. And bringing the program of the whole district closer to them. So I do think a lot about this education and community-based programs. And embodiment, I do think as a performance curator, it's something that you, yeah, I hope I understand the question correctly, but I do think about this a lot also when I'm very interested in artists who think about that and creating certain environments with an exhibition, more immersive environments, and how we can enhance or give alternative forms of perceiving certain topics and certain artistic positions by creating such environment. I hope this was the answer to the question.
A couple of people asked about the residency program,
Mhm.
and is there an age limit for it? How does one get involved?
Mhm.
Um, if you can
Well,
answer that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy about this interest because I'm also very fond of making it more visible that we have this program. You can find more about this on our website. There's a own landing page for the artists in residence. We do have artist in residence program that where you can we do calls and you can apply. We have an art and ecology focus, but then there are also certain programs where we work together with partners like the ministry. We have a writers in residence program. We have a program that is currently focusing on South Africa and Moldavia. So yeah, there are different formats where you can apply either with ourselves or there's also Transit, Erste Stiftung, which is focusing on Eastern European countries. So please check out our website. There are different ways to apply for this. There, as far as I know, is no age. There's no age limitation. We just recently had an author, yeah, who's more advanced in in his career, and you can also there are also possibilities of coming with your family, with your partner and children. So yeah, please check out our website.
Last question from Nicholas. I'm interested in the idea of openness. Since modernist secularism, what is this? We'd hope for prophets, golden Haggadahs, Rabboni, yet we're still stuck with Beuys, Warhol, or Duchamp. Is the Jewish Museum a global concept, an indication that religion or devotion may once again be an acceptable domain of expression in art? With the recent phenomena in the US, like the closure this year of the San Francisco Contemporary Jewish Museum, as well as the Whitney Biennial Independent Study Program, um, could maybe chances of faiths or mission of sharing values to Gentiles not be progressed and the institution opened by banding together with some local interfaith discussion and to address a convention that religious art is not palatable in contemporary art? I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts.
I have to say, as I'm not part of the Jewish Museum, I'm also not so much anymore part of the discourse, the museological discourse around Jewish museums. But I can say that also until now, the Jewish Museum in Vienna is very much open to inviting and involving a lot of different yeah, different perspectives and different coming from very diverse backgrounds. And it absolutely, the Jewish Museum in Vienna was and is not a religious institution. It's mainly it's funded by the city of Vienna, so thus is not primarily focusing on religious aspects. I'm not sure I answered the question. I'm also not sure I can. It's a very complex question. I might not, yeah, there might not be enough time to differentiate, have enough space for a differentiated discussion about this. And yeah, it's not the discourse I'm most concerned about right now, I have to say. I hope
I
that's.
mean, I guess that the question, on the one hand, maybe you could just say one thing about is the address to spirituality and organized religion
Mhm.
in curating something that is contemporary now. Is there an interest in that now? Because it's not typical that one sees shows that specifically address organized religion outside of a museum of like a Jewish museum.
Mhm. Okay. I do think I hope that I hope I understand also this correctly, but I do hope that there are museums and institutions stay open for a differentiated discourse where also these topics can be discussed I think it's all a matter of how to address topics, also topics that are very, controversial. I think it's important to how do you say, to involve, to keep the dialogue open and to involve different opinions, which also sometimes means maybe not agreeing. But I think we are in a time where I find it more and more important to keep the dialogue going, and not kind of like, to really also provide a space to also discuss controversial topics and not close not close up to certain perspectives. So I hope that answered it a bit more.
Okay, great. Okay, well, Astrid, thank you so much for the public presentation. Thanks to everyone for joining, and I'll see you in a moment on the student session link.
Thank you very much for all your interesting questions. See you.
Okay, bye.